Hi, I'm Teresa Martin from Lower Cape TV, and your host for The Minds of Summer, produced in partnership with the Cape Cod Institute, which brings leading thinkers and doers from around the world to its renowned week-long workshop right here on the Outer Cape. And with me today is the founder of that very organization, Dr. Gil Levin. Dr. Levin is a professor emeritus from the Albert Einstein College of Medicine, where he was part of both the clinical and social sides of medicine. He also has a long relationship with the Outer Cape, and I'm just delighted to have him here. So welcome, Gil. It's great to see you.
It's a pleasure to be here.
If I could shake your hand or give you a big welcoming hug or something. No, it's great to have you here. So the Cape Cod Institute, right? I mean, it's a summer-long series of professional seminars that brings amazing speakers from around the world to an equally amazing group of attendees from literally around the world here to Cape Cod.
Yeah, and it's remarkable how the teachers love the students and the students love the teachers. The teachers tell me that there's no place else where they have the satisfaction of working with such a challenging and interesting group of people.
So these are like high-level professionals, or?
They are. They're people who, in many cases, people who are very high profile in their field worldwide. And in some cases, we are encouraging younger talent, too. We try to do some balance of that.
Right. So why here? Why Cape Cod at all?
Why Cape Cod?
Yeah, why Cape Cod?
Well,
I mean, why not Manhattan?
I was...
Well, not in August, but...
I was a graduate student at Boston University. So this goes back to the 50s. And in the 50s, I frequently came to the Cape for a quick trip and sometimes for longer. And why we started this started in 1980. And I had been at Einstein all those years. I wore many different hats over those years. And in 1979, we got a new dean who was familiar with some of the work that I had done. He had previously been the dean at Boston University Medical School. And he came to Einstein with a wish to bring more of the socio-medical side of medicine into medicine, and was aware of my work and invited me to lead an effort on a college-wide basis to make that happen. And in that, in the prior summer, because of a bureaucratic delay, I brought my family to the Cape. And I had in mind that this dean, as splendid a fellow as he was a dean, and deans didn't last forever, particularly in that period of time. And while here, I started to think about the history of the Cape and shrinks on the Cape, and wondered if maybe we could create a continuing education program here that would make use of some of the same stuff that we were doing at the medical school to move it in that direction. And it turned out that it was a summer without any sun, or at least the 2 weeks we were here.
That summer of '79?
The summer of '79. We were in a dune shack called True Grit. And we had a 6-year-old who could walk out forever on the dunes, if you could bear being outside. And the battleship was here. So it was an extraordinary place, and it really never did. And this True Grit was a place that would have been wonderful on a sunny, dry day.
Right.
But here it was, overcast every day. And I started to, in earnest, I couldn't stand these people I was with after a while. And I set out to see if this really would be feasible. And I visited a lot of places, most notable of which was the Nauset Regional High School, where we are today.
Wow.
It was a new place, spick and span.
It's just been built.
Yes.
That's
yes,
right.
Yes. And we've been here ever since. We've done programs in other locations too in these years. But basically the pattern of week-long mornings to learn, afternoons to assimilate that learning, and also to be with family and friends and to network.
Right.
And it's a pattern that people like. They come and they come back again and again and again.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, let me go back in time a little again, and I want to ask you a little bit about the work you were doing at Einstein in this clinical versus social sort of dynamics, because I think it mirrors some of what we're seeing in sort of behavioral sciences today, where
Yeah.
you remember what doctors were like then, right? They wore white coats and they were very distant, and it was all about the body, and everything was very sort of science-based.
And exactly. And the medicine was dominated by specialization and subspecialization, which to a large extent continues to this day. And there was a lack of recognition. There was a lot of criticism of doctors in those days. And the doctor was in the position really of being the authority dealing with a patient who was sick. And the doctor gave the orders and the patient was supposed to comply with the orders. And there were many studies that were written in that way. And the idea really was to move toward a health partnership between the physician and the patient or client. And the truth is that patient satisfaction is completely related to the patient's experience of the medical encounter. If you go to the doc with a pain, and all the tests are done, and you read read the results of the tests, and you're told there's nothing wrong.
Right.
Nothing wrong? Everything's wrong.
Right, I heard, I feel miserable, right.
Yeah, I still have that experience that I wanted you to help me with.
Right.
And that's really what drove what we were doing at Einstein. We started a number of courses. One was called Bedside Manners, in which we talked about what was happening in the medical student in relation to the patient. We did a lot of taping and stuff like that. We also started something called the Human Dimensions in Medicine program, which was a program that brought students during their orientation into small groups, which they remained in throughout the period. And over this period, a lot of things were happening in medicine. At that period in time, probably the best representative of that kind of medicine, approach to medicine, was at McMaster University in Canada. They had a community-oriented program that was much loved and much admired, but not implemented. And we were, and some others were influenced by that. And we built a lot of those things into the Einstein environment.
Right.
And in a certain way, when this started, I had in mind the two sides of my own education. One, I was trained as a clinical psychologist, and I'm licensed to practice in the state of New York, and I've never been asked to, no one ever asked me to see it. And it's gotten to be a much more serious issue now, the licensure matter and the legalistic aspects of it. And it's not always good for the field for that to happen, because innovation doesn't happen inside a sealed cabinet.
Right.
So there's always this question about best practices. Certainly there are best practices that all should follow. At the same time, there are places where innovation is stymied by people who carry checklists rather than are really concerned with the human dimension of what they're about.
One thing that even strikes me today here, that the people, I've sat in on a few of the classes to get a feel for them, and I'm struck by the different disciplines that people who are participating in this process come from. So you have someone talking about an aspect of something that's clinical, but you have people from, HR, and you have people from medical space, and you have people who are, psychologists, and it's fascinating.
It all has to do with this thing called diversity. If you have two groups of Harvard-trained people solve problems, they'll get a certain result. If you take a group that has a couple of those people in it, and then a whole range randomly selected from other places, that group will always come up with a better solution, a creative solution. And what happens a lot is that the role of the therapist or the role of the doctor dominates the person. And the truth is, it's the person inside the role that really matters. And that recognition has grown. I talked about how we did some of these things in the good old days at Einstein. They're being done in a lot of places, and particularly Harvard took the lead in that and has seriously modified its program. It's actually happening at this point, which is a very happy thing.
Very heartening, actually.
Yeah.
so I'm going back in time again. Like usually this drew people who were incredibly well known, and I was looking through some of the older program books.
Yes. Memory Lane.
Yes, and it's
yes.
like Norman Cousins, right? He became known in popular cultures. Masters and Johnsons. Watch the TV show now. You know.
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
tell me about some of the people who participated.
Well, the Norman was what put us on the map.
Yeah.
He had written his book, The Anatomy of an Illness, and it was a story of how he had a very painful, debilitating illness, and he treated himself by watching Charlie Chaplin movies in his hospital. And that book, and he played a role in that shift that we were talking about in the direction of the human side of medicine. So I approached him to do it, and he said, you know, I can't talk for 15 hours. And I said, well, could you talk for like 3? You could do like one day.
Right.
And he said, I could do that. And then we together sort of concocted this idea. He was an advocate of world peace. And there's a connection between health and world peace. Huh?
We're going to come back to that. I want to hear about that. Okay.
Well, a bit of it. So I designed this program about laughter. It was the first program, I think, done on psychoimmunology, which is the interaction between the brain and the brain and the body.
Right.
And I decided that a program would be good if he talked about his health experience, his getting well experience, and then we had somebody talk about how the positive emotions affect the body, and then we talked about how you make somebody laugh.
How do you make someone laugh? Right.
Well, it's hard. So what happened is he came and he spent a day talking about his trip to the hospital, and then he talked about world peace, and then Steve Locke, who was I think still at Beth Israel, who was a young immunologist, talked about what he knew on the topic. Problem was he only knew about the bad emotions, not the good ones.
Right.
And then I had talked with Alan Funt, who did Candid Camera.
Yes.
And I asked him if he would come and do the day on that. And he said he didn't want to be window dressing, and he wouldn't do it. And then I got stuck, and finally somebody came up with the idea of, there was an ad on television in those days. It was somebody who'd just eaten an immense amount of stuff, and it was, I can't believe I ate the whole thing.
Yes.
And I got the advertising agency that had made that and they came here and turned the auditorium here into a Broadway place with equipment and trucks and this and that. But they had their own agenda, and their agenda was they had won a Clio for the Clio, the advertising award, for that commercial. But their message here was, being funny doesn't always make money. Now, I learned from this, that it would be much wiser, as much as possible, to stick to the model of getting somebody who is sensational on some topic and making them very comfortable and creating an environment where they can be at their best. People are at their best when their real self is there and not all the roles that they play. And that's the same time when learning occurs. And that's the same thing that happens when therapy happens. And that's the same thing that happens when a teacher and a student participate in a teaching moment.
It's that
They're
little
all
magic
the same.
place.
That's right, yes.
And you've gotten to that magic place now.
We have a kind of a nice, we get there a lot. And it's so satisfying to see that. And it's so wonderful for me to hear, I'm getting on in years now, and it's so wonderful for me to hear how much people care about their experience at the Cape Cod Institute. Every day I run into somebody who was here, who's been coming for 20 years, or somebody who came 20 years ago and it had an effect on them, and now their children are grown and they're back again. And it just makes me feel terrific that that's the case.
Well, I know that the trends that we see in, I don't want to say self-help's part of it, but different treatments, different approaches to kind of behavior and having a healthy mind, they change over time. And I think they reflect what society is scared about, what we're scared about, kind of where we are in time. So in 36 years, amazing, 36 years, have you seen trends come and go that reflect where we are?
I have. I think most of the seeds of what we have now were there and represented in that first program in 1980. But what's happened is, for much of the field, the brain was a black box. In other words, one didn't concern one. You could be concerned about dreams, which may have something to do with the brain. You could be concerned about behavior, which has something to do with the brain.
Right.
But the brain itself wasn't a factor. And the word mind didn't exist in academic psychology.
Really?
It was something that you really couldn't talk about. And in the psychoanalytic side of it, it was all about the mind. And psychoanalysis was this exquisitely interesting theory that had very little in the way of intervention built into it. So it was a good way of understanding. It was a good way for the residents in psychiatry, for example, to gird themselves against this behavior that they didn't really understand in people who had very serious illness. And so it was a way that it was useful for the staff, but it wasn't really that useful for the patients. And there was a lot of improvisation about that. I think Pat Ogden talked about that when she was here. And she said the things that she was supposed to do weren't working.
Right.
And it caused her to think outside the box. And now we're understanding the brain, and we know something about how impulses travel at different rates from different parts of the brain. That has an enormous implication for the conduct of therapy. There are moments when some of the therapists now are sufficiently sensitive to that to know that this is not a moment to attempt to do that because the patient is not, the patient's brain isn't ready.
Well, it's interesting. I just looking again at the 36 years of programs and seeing things, I see things in the last few years where the terms that didn't show up, but maybe they were there in seed form. Like I see the word mindfulness showing up a lot in the last 5 years. I see neuroscience showing up a lot. And I look in the earlier ones, and there's much more discussion about sort of much more clinical kinds of ways of looking at the world. So to me, it was interesting to see that.
Yes.
Is that a change you've seen, or were those seeds really there?
Well, it is a change, but the seeds were there. In our first year, we had Johann Stoive, who was one of the pioneers in the use of biofeedback, which is a brain-related activity. We had, well, I mentioned the psychoneuroimmunology program, which was the brain behavior. So the seeds were there, and I had a very strong wish to integrate the hard science part and the soft science part. And a lot of my career has been connected to that in one way or another. Your question, though, I think was the trend of that. I think what's happened is mindfulness is one trend. Another is knowledge of the brain, and they come together. They are merging, so that you have people who are very sophisticated in their understanding, which, by the way, changes every day about the brain, and are equally adept at the mindfulness part of it. And there's all those studies about how the brains of meditators are different in ways that are positive compared to those who are not meditators.
So how do you pick every year who's going to be part of the mix?
With great difficulty.
I can imagine it must be really challenging.
Yes. Well, the trick is to be at the right point in the curve. There's a place, like right now, there's a lot of interest in neurofeedback, and I am getting really interested in myself. It's a fascinating thing however, I've had this feeling before that we're there, but we're not quite there.
Right.
And if I were to do a couple of courses on that next year, the attendance would be very poor. But if I wait a bit, and we'll be in better position. You don't want to be too early, you don't want to be too late. with it. But the trick is to understand where the cutting edge is.
Right.
And we spend a lot of time and effort to do that.
I mean, it seems that playing that role within this academic circle is incredibly valuable right there, of just kind of being a feedback loop of where are we, what's rising in interest. And
Well, knowledge of the brain is exploding.
yeah,
And knowledge of how the body and the brain, the rest of the body, the brain is part of a larger system,
Right.
how they work together. And I certainly couldn't predict what the next one would be.
that's too bad, 'cause I was going to ask you what's coming next based on 36
Yes,
years
yes.
now. What's coming in the next 30
I'll
years?
find somebody who thinks they know, and then I'll
Okay.
bring him here, and we'll see if he's right or she's right.
That's right.
That's another thing that's happened. The number of women on our faculty has exploded. I remember people used to complain that there were very few women here, and now suddenly all of the students, not all, but a large majority are women, and I think probably a plurality of the faculty are as well.
Is that reflective of the professions as well?
I think to a large extent it is, and it's in our health psychology doctoral program at Einstein. In our first class, we had a few men, and then they seemed to have disappeared. We had to reach to bring on that same diversity principle.
Right, the
we had to
exact
reach
opposite
to
of what
get the
you'd-
men to get the
Yeah.
men who measured up to the ability. And that's happening all over.
Yeah.
Most of the valedictorians and all the universities are women. Where are these men hiding? I mean, I know that they were manipulating money during that period. And I think some of them are now moving into big data in areas that are more congenial to people in general, like education
Right.
and the environment. The environment is pretty important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we're saying for people come here and they're touched by the Cape, they're touched by the programs that
Yeah.
happen here, and they
Yeah.
in turn also have some impact on the area. Are there any stories that you can share, any examples of times you think that might have happened? That something happened because someone came?
Well, I was the advisor for a medical student whose name was Cal Cohen. And Cal contrived somehow to get a summer experience, spend the whole summer here at the Cape Cod Institute. While he was here, he was not idle.
Ah.
I mean, he had his fun. But he also did our first Cape Cod guide. He also started the Cape Cod Institute bookstore, which endures to this day. And most recently, he's been an active force in AIDS research and had a group, a leadership group of that in Provincetown. And I invited him to get involved in looking at our future. He's fled the coop. He's now in California, and again doing research. And that research has made his research has played a significant role in the improvements in AIDS care of AIDS patients.
And part of that's triggered by he was here for a summer and...
He was here for a summer, and he was, and that's what was happening in the world at that time.
Wow.
Yeah. And I think there are probably other instances. Maybe did I answer that question?
I did.
Yeah.
I'm just curious. I think the Cape shapes so many of us, and when I was asking why the Cape before, it isn't just because it's a beautiful place. There's something here sometimes that I think makes people think outside of themselves.
Well, yeah, they're so aware of the environment, and the Cape is the Cape's environment.
Right.
And if we can't keep that, then we're in trouble. But if we can keep that, the other problems can be addressed and solved.
Yeah. I also find it interesting that in an age where everything's digital, that some things really need to be in person, like the ability to step away from your life and connect and network. You were talking about networking and the sharing that happens here.
A lot of our people, we've invited them to do digital things related, and some of them are very amenable to it. But a large group of the people who describe themselves as alumni has to do with the mix of the Cape environment. They have this intense training in the morning, then they go off and consolidate it, and that's the way learning works.
Well, you know something we don't do, we forget to do, I think, a lot, that we're trying to absorb stuff and everything's thrown off, and a built-in time to assimilate and process and make sense of what we've heard. And so you're right, the mornings, I guess I sat in a few of these, and they're really intense. I mean, the amount of information and the sharing, it's amazing.
Yeah.
But then the program is built so that you have the afternoon to not just go off and play, but absorb everything.
To do whatever you're going to do, however your style is. And your style may be to play with your kids and go to the beach and reflect, you know. And your style may be that you want to network with people and make connections and nurture those relationships that begin in the groups. And that's fine too. It's free play.
Free play is good.
Yes.
So can you give us any hints of even what's coming next year? Are you back next year for year number 37?
Number 37, we will be back next year. And we now have that question of what happens to the program when I'm no longer available to orchestrate it. And I will tell you that we've started to...
That's a scary thought, I'm sorry.
We're doing something about that.
But are there any key speakers that you can give a hint at, or any trends that you might be focusing on coming up?
Yeah. Let me just think about that. The usual suspects will be back. And every year, the trick is not the usual suspects, but what's next.
Right.
And I'm working on what's next, but I'm not yet ready to say what the next is.
No, it's just, like I said, I know I've said this, but until I saw this in action, I had no idea this was happening here. And I live here, and so I kind of joke it's one of the best kept secrets on the Outer Cape.
Well, the word gets out from time to time, but then it gets forgotten. In our first 15 years or so, Cape Cod Times did a full section, in their Sunday section.
Right.
There was a wonderful he retired in the process. Tom, he would come every Friday, and he would sit in on one of the classes, interview the person, and then he would write a really thoughtful piece on that topic.
Right.
And we miss him. We were very visible at one point, and we're, I guess, getting visible again thanks to...
well, you should be. It's great stuff.
Yes. Well, yeah.
So the people who come, and this is something that people here have asked me, is this just for people from other places, all these experts around the world, or is there something here for people who live here?
There's a great deal for people who live here, and we have people who have gotten their graduate education, their postgraduate education here by coming year after year. Wow. And they serve as course assistants, and they come, people who work in agencies on the Cape who provide care come and staff our courses and help to make them great. They're local resources. They know this place. Wonderful. They know what and they're really very nice people and very welcoming. So people come from Japan, and in that same group is a group of local people too. There was 2 summers ago, we had a group from Japan, all ladies with the umbrellas and the masks, because there was this concern in Japan about the air quality.
Right.
And the kids were still in session because they had too many snow days. They were taking their finals. And we saw these 2 groups interacting and being respectful of one another for the most part.
That's pretty incredible.
And it was really good, yes.
Well, believe it or not, we're out of time. It just flew by. And I just want to thank you again. This is Dr. Gil Levin, founder of the Cape Cod Institute. And it's been terrific having you here today. Thank you very much.
It has been my pleasure.